Good morning and welcome to the Rural Telecommunications Congress live webcast on rural broadband, fueling the fire of rural innovation. My name is Drew Clark. I'm the editor and publisher of BroadbandBreakfast.com and the president of Rural Telecommunications Congress. Our nonprofit organization is 22 years old. It actually dates back to Colorado, the western slopes of Colorado, where we are right now in Montrose, with a great panel to discuss how Montrose did it and what other communities can learn about getting better broadband in their rural communities. RTC, the Rural Telecommunications Congress, has had a very long and storied history of going to rural communities and gathering people together to discuss some of the needs they've had. We've had conferences everywhere from Springfield, Illinois to Smuggler's Notch, Vermont to Phoenix, Arizona, and everywhere in between where we gathered people together to talk about rural broadband. About 9 years ago, we began a partnership with Broadband Communities magazine, and we host the annual Rural Broadband Track at that conference every April. But this initiative, this live rural broadband webcast, is our effort to bring rural America to you so that you can see what successful communities in rural America are doing. After I introduce our panel, we're going to talk a little bit about Montrose, Colorado, about its history, and we're going to learn some of the challenges they overcame and what has resulted from their efforts at getting high-quality broadband throughout their community. I want to invite everyone who's watching to tweet to us at #RuralBroadband. You'll be able to interact with us through that method for the next hour or so as we continue with this webcast. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel. From your left to right, we have Councilmember Roy Anderson, who has had an extensive career in the computer industry on the Front Range, the other side of Colorado, before moving here and realizing your dream to live on the western slope. We'll talk a little bit about your background and what led you to choose Montrose and some of the work you've done as a city council member and as a former mayor of Montrose. Thank you. Next to him is Virgil Turner. Virgil has served as Montrose's Director of Innovation and Citizen Engagement since 2012, although he's worked for the city for 31 years, he hastens to point out. He is the champion driving a lot of progress on the city management side, and he'll really speak in great detail, I hope, about some of the things that Montrose has done that's made a difference for your community. Next to him is Kent Blackwell. Kent is the Chief Technology Officer at Delta Montrose Electric Association and its new subsidiary, Elevate Internet, which is a local fiber internet company that offers 100 megabit symmetrical and 1 gigabit symmetrical. Is that right, Kent? And he will speak a little bit about DMEA's role and what the Delta Montrose Electric Association has done for the broader area of Delta and Montrose counties out here on the western slope. And then far to your right is Dennis Lankies. He's the co-founder and serves as the Chief Visionary Officer for Proximity Space, which, if I understand correctly, got its start right here in Montrose. Right. So it's an example of a success story of a company that really couldn't do what it's doing without the high-quality broadband that it's been able to obtain here in Montrose. And I think that, Dennis, as we get to that part of the conversation, we hope to really be able to speak to the role that this ecosystem plays in spurring innovation throughout a community. So with that, let's turn to you, Councilmember Anderson. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from, and why did you start to decide that I want to be on the other side of the Rocky Mountains?
Okay, Drew, thank you. So I started out life after college in the Air Force, did a tour of duty, and then decided I wanted to pursue computers. That's what I got a master's in, and found a wonderful job opportunity in Fort Collins, Colorado, which, for those who aren't familiar, this is a city We say on the Front Range, so there's a whole group of cities north and south of Denver, and Fort Collins is north of Denver. It's a metropolitan area. And so I started working at Hewlett-Packard. I was a software engineer, and later in my career got into computer marketing. And during my whole career, internet access was unquestioned. I mean, Hewlett-Packard had terrific capabilities in terms of the internet, and it's something we just took for granted. And you could work from home, you could upload and download big files, and so it was just, like I said, something that I took for granted. So as my career came to an end and I wanted to retire, my wife and I, our children had grown and moved away, and we were looking for a beautiful place to retire where life was a little quieter and calmer, and yet I still wanted to be able to access the internet, and I had a consulting business. I wanted to be able to do those sorts of things that require the internet. I worked for a company in Israel, I worked for a company in San Diego, and a couple companies in Fort Collins, and I wanted to retain those connections, but not have to live on the Front Range in the big metropolitan area. So my wife and I kind of searched around. We wanted to stay in Colorado, and we had vacationed over on this side of the Continental Divide, lovingly called the Western Slope. And we found that the people were friendly and the climate was wonderful. I refer to it as the banana belt of Colorado. Some people laugh at that, but
Banana belt. What is a banana belt?
So it's a place that's a little warmer in the winter and a little perhaps cooler in the summer. We have calm weather. It's never life-threatening, and it's just a great climate. No matter how warm in the summer, it cools off at night, and so it's just a wonderful place. All of Colorado's obviously wonderful, but this is kind of special. And we found the community, which is, it was a little smaller when we moved here in 2014, but around 20,000 population, which is just right. It was big enough for some shopping to keep my wife happy, and small enough that we didn't have to worry about all those traffic incidences that we used to have on the Front Range. And yet, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I wanted to just ask a question. I understand that there was another council member, Judy Ann Files, who participated quite extensively in getting this broadband project growing. We would have had her on the panel, but she's out of town during this 4th of July weekend, so we had to settle for Mayor Anderson instead. But tell us, Councilmember Anderson, what prompted you to run for city council, and how did the discussion about getting better quality broadband play into your decision?
Okay, I'll do that. Jump ahead. In 2016, I was asked by some council members if I would consider running, and by then I was familiar with the community. I knew that broadband had already started, and I wanted to continue the progress that was going on here, and so I thought it would be important to be on city council and move the community forward in high-tech terms. And so I ran in 2016, got elected, and Judy Ann Files had already been on council and was a strong proponent of broadband. And so the council, before I joined it, had already established a legacy of supporting and encouraging the development of broadband capabilities here in the community for economic development reasons primarily. And I'm sure Virgil will talk a lot more about that and how it really got started. But yes, Councilwoman Files was an instigator, I guess you could say, a main promoter, as were a couple other of the council members at that time who have now moved on due to term limitations. So.
Yeah, well, one final question for you, Councilman, before we move on is, how has your connectivity changed at your home, and what has that enabled you to do?
Well, so unfortunately, I haven't got broadband yet. I haven't got fiber. So I have a rather common kind of connectivity from another provider, waiting to have my friends at Elevate connect my house up. But I've had sufficient capability to do some of the consulting I used to do. I don't work with as large of files as I used to, but it still is good. And then I have become very jealous of my friends in other parts of town who have that capability, and I'm just waiting for them to come down my street with the fiber.
That is certainly an issue. I've been living in Orem, Utah, and we have a provider there called Utopia, which also offers symmetrical gigabit fiber, but it hasn't reached my particular house yet. So that becomes an issue, and so I certainly we'll discuss that more with Kent in just a moment. So Virgil, welcome to the program, to the Rural Broadband live stream. Tell us a little bit about Montrose and your involvement in some of these technology leadership teams and how that came to affect your broadband strategy, Virgil.
Sure. Well, first, welcome to Montrose, everyone, and thanks, Drew, for you and the RTC coming to Montrose. Start back probably in the 90s. We as many rural areas, faced a predicament of not advancing our telecommunications as we saw the advancements happening elsewhere in the country, especially in the urban areas. And so that was of particular interest because we all love to live here, and we wanted to be able to continue doing business here and take advantage of the new economies of working digitally. And so one of our first efforts was a collaborative effort with the formation of a new nonprofit called the Montrose Area Telecommunications Group. That group got together actually before the internet really kicked off and websites really started taking off. We actually were working on community billboard, community boards that would dial in and so forth, and we brought one of those an early community bulletin boards to Montrose. That quickly was replaced with a web presence, and Montrose registered montrose.org, and it's a domain we're continuing to use. And stood up one of the first government websites in Colorado. That effort led to continuing to work with our incumbents, trying to help them understand our need and develop business plans to get the services that we needed here to really take advantage of this new digital economy that was happening elsewhere.
So Virgil, what were the alternatives from a competitive perspective, and why did you find them lacking?
Yeah, so when we were first starting to work on internet service, it was back in the dial-up days when, again, before internet browsers, just being able to do email and things like that. There was one internet service provider that had service in Montrose. That when you have lack of competition, you have higher prices, maybe not as great of service. And so we were really interested in making sure that we had the structure within our telecommunications system that would allow that competition to happen. We did a frame relay proposal to an incumbent, and they listened to us, actually made this service become available here in Montrose and other communities around the Western Slope. And almost overnight, we had 4 or 5 ISPs start up in Montrose just because of the reduced pricing for their wholesale service that they needed for the internet. Those efforts continued and continue today. And I think the story is a story of collaboration amongst communities throughout our region to get the service that we feel that we need. Many of those, some of that collaborative work led to local technology planning teams in each of our communities throughout the Western Slope. We had a team in Gunnison, a team out of La Plata County or Telluride, a team here in Montrose, a team in Delta. And we were really all working on our own issues, but at some point we said, look, to make this happen, again, we need to look broader as a region.
So let's step back just for a second. So obviously Montrose has communications needs as a government, and you've been involved in meeting those, as well as helping a lot of the anchor institutions, schools, hospitals, and so forth to connect. And these planning teams that you're discussing are really government-led efforts to try to see what can be done, not necessarily that the government needs to be the one to do it, but that they want to make sure that they have the choice and competition in their regions. Would you?
I would say the local technology planning team in Colorado, that concept came out of the state government. There was an office of broadband stood up in the state government, in the Office of Information Technology, which was a great move. And that Department of Broadband, or Office of Broadband, really started thinking about how we can move this effort forward across the state. Locally, those local technology planning teams weren't necessarily government-led. They were a collaboration of school districts and just business ISPs that were hoping to get their wholesale internet costs down. Again, lack of competition kept those wholesale commodity internet prices up. In some cases, $50 per meg per month for wholesale symmetrical internet.
Just give a perspective here. How much could you buy that connectivity in Denver, say?
Well, in later years when we were still seeing similar prices to that, maybe in Montrose those prices had dropped under $10, we were seeing those prices at under $1 or even 50 cents, 30 cents per meg per month in Denver and Albuquerque. So that really created an unequal
10 to 20 to 30 times more
exactly
to pay for that transport.
It was
cost.
not an even playing field. So the folks that were trying to do business in Montrose, either selling internet service or just buying internet service from one of our providers, their prices were escalated.
So this is going to help anyone. This is going to help a private internet provider,
Exactly.
right? Or WISP, a wireless internet service provider that wants to
Exactly.
offer broadband. So before we move to the rest of our panel and further this discussion, you raised an interesting paradox here. Colorado teed up this process through a statewide broadband office.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there was a bill, SB 152. Tell us a little bit about that and what pressure that put on Colorado communities.
Yeah, in 2005, I think it was an effort that we saw happen across the country of incumbents seeing maybe seeing increased competition to solve these problems, like I just stated, of getting additional competition in areas. Competition brings lower prices, better service in most cases, and in my opinion, the incumbents were seeing increased pressure, additional competition, because folks were trying to figure out how to solve it themselves. Sometimes that was a local government that was trying to solve that themselves. And so they went to our General Assembly with a bill that would basically prohibit municipal or local governments from competing in the retail offering of internet service. It was Senate Bill 05152. That bill had, we were fortunate in Colorado, which is not the case in a lot of places in our country, that an amendment was made to that bill that allowed a local referendum or a vote in a local government entity to say, we want to be exempted. We want our government to be exempted from Senate Bill 05152. So that was a great thing that happened. Many of us didn't know how great it was until the aftermath
Well,
that we're seeing.
tell us what, in a nutshell, what has this amendment allowed communities to do?
Sure. So the first communities that that were successful, there were several unsuccessful attempts to have a referendum in their community to be exempted. In 2013, November of 2013, Longmont and Centennial were the two states on the front range, thank you, passed fairly substantially, you know, with a majority of votes, of course, to exempt their communities. They came against, in one community in particular, Longmont, came under very strong opposition and campaigning marketing against it. But it still passed. I think this was their third attempt. So they really set the stage for other government entities to do this. In December, right after that election, with their success, our city council gave me the direction to let's put our own ballot initiative forward for the April 1st, 2014 municipal election. And so we did. The outcome of that is Montrose was the third entity, a third local government in Colorado. Now we're well over 100 governments in Colorado that have exempted themselves from this prohibition of local government providing for their community's needs.
So now it's more the rule than the exemption, perhaps. Well, and just to put in context, 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago, Montrose passed your exemption from SB 152, this bill, and now more than 100 communities in Colorado have voted out from this. So it's almost become a bit of a planning tool for a community to say, hey, this is how we're going to get broadband. First, we have to do our vote to exempt ourselves from.
And it gave us a sense that we're just not thinking that this is something that's a need, but have not been proven to us by our citizens. It was an overwhelming 72% of our citizens said, hey, look, we want you to have that right to be able to do this, to help us solve this problem that we recognize.
Yeah, excellent. Well, wonderful. So that, I think, sets the stage for the communities actively considering it. It maybe wants to do broadband itself, but isn't committed to necessarily doing that. And we have, indeed, an electric co-op. Kent, just say, 30 seconds on who DMEA is, and then we'll tee up the video that explores the fiber service, and we'll talk more about Elevate. Okay.
DMEA, of course, is the local electric co-op here in Montrose. We serve the greater population of Montrose County as well as Delta County. We have a footprint of roughly 33,000 electric meters, and to date, Elevate's 3 years in, and we're up to 6,000 broadband subscribers. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Let's go ahead and tee up the video so that we can watch it. It's about 2 minutes, and that will give all of our listeners a sense of what's going on here with DMEA and Elevate Fiber.
Here in the heart of beautiful western Colorado, known for its unrivaled outdoor recreation, bountiful harvests, and unparalleled quality of life, changes are being made. Elevate Fiber is transforming the way we work, live, and play by creating exciting new opportunities for local families and businesses. Elevate is a locally owned and operated internet service provider created by our local electric co-op, DMEA, that is building a fiber optic network to connect our remote, rugged region to the rest of the world.
DMEA has always had this tremendous can-do attitude. That's been a part of the history of our communities around here since well over 100 years ago. People are getting what needs to be done. They brought the water down out of the mountains and irrigated all these valleys and built the communities and put in all sorts of different kinds of infrastructure, and this is just the latest chapter in that.
Access to gigabit internet is providing endless opportunities for the future and the advancement of our communities.
We're watching a shift in the workforce, and that workforce is moving towards a location-neutral status. Those numbers are quite staggering, and Montrose and this entire region are entering into a playing field where now, with the connectivity we have, we can actually be a part of that. We can watch relocation happen from across the country into this area that we enjoy the lifestyle, and we're starting to become that destination that people are looking for.
We're surrounded by incredible outdoor recreation opportunities here. It's so important for not just Montrose to have this, but our entire region, the DMEA service territory and then beyond. You can come and live the lifestyle that you want and be able to make a living that you want.
One of the things I'm most excited about is I think it will accelerate the entrepreneurial spirit in these areas. And we have incredible entrepreneurs around here. Making a living here has always been hard, and so people find all sorts of very creative ways to have businesses at home. And I think the kinds of people we'll bring in are those entrepreneurs, and that, again, that can-do entrepreneurial spirit that will be a great boon for our whole community.
Let's keep moving forward. The spirit of our people and our community runs deep. We have strong roots, big dreams, and an area that now truly offers it all. Elevate Fiber is here to move us forward and provide a whole new view of what our region has to offer. Are you ready?
Well, excellent. Thank you for allowing us to show that video. So Kent, why don't you talk a little bit more about the process whereby DMEA decided that it wanted to build out fiber to the home to all of the residents that get electric service.
Yeah, back in December 2015, one of our board members, we had our board meetings, we had roughly 80 members show up to that meeting to kind of raise a protest to really push DMEA forward in leveraging a lot of our fiber optic network that we built out for the electric grid. Those that member rising up, if you will, harkens back 80 years to the days of rural electrification and bringing about electricity for rural communities. In the same way, this community kind of rose up and spoke and said, you know, we really need a dependable, low-cost broadband solution that will allow us to move forward as a community, as a, you know, for economic benefit, for, you know, many different reasons. You know, the community spoke up to say, you know, leverage these assets to make broadband widely available.
So let's go back a second or two to, you talk about the fiber assets. When did DMEA start using fiber for your own smart grid related purposes?
Roughly 2014, we started building out what we refer to as a middle mile network between our substations, you know, just to improve the SCADA and other communication links between all of our substations and the heart of our network.
And this is quite common among electric co-ops, as I understand it. There's a need to have that kind of fiber reliability for your own purposes, right? And many times, well, as most of us in the broadband space know, the big expense in doing fiber is just getting the fiber in the ground. And so when you've got it in the ground, you have crossed a major threshold. And so now that's not necessarily in the ground to every home, of course. It's just from one place to another, a kind of a middle mile sort of route. But it gave you a sense of how valuable it could be. Is that right, Ken?
Yeah, it was the you know, the backbone that truly was needed to kind of spread out and reach, you know, each of those homes throughout the communities that we serve. You know, the substation, you know, is the heart of the electric grid in each of those communities, and having that fiber to each of those substations, you know, just really kind of created that backbone from which we were able to develop Elevate and branch off to reach each and every
Now, you described this meeting in December 2015 like a little mini uprising, right?
Right.
So there was a lot of concern about the quality of broadband. Would you say it was driven by people inside of Montrose or outside of Montrose? Talk a little bit about the city and the county split.
Yeah, as much as the rural parts of our service territory is, could probably speak to a louder cry for, a starving need to be met. Even within the city of Montrose itself, as much as there's, a couple of different incumbent providers and competitive service providers in the form of a couple of CLECs and several wireless ISPs, all the same, there was, an outcry for dependable service, an outcry for low-cost service. So we felt the cry from all reaches of the territories that we serve.
Now, we're getting some questions from our audience about government versus non-government competition. And just to be clear, DMEA is not a government provider, correct?
No, we are not.
You're
As
right.
much as, we are, regulated and run by the people, for the people, we are not.
You're a co-op, right?
We're a co-op.
I mean, it's a long-standing form of getting electricity and now increasingly a form of getting broadband. But I do want to zero in on this, right? So Montrose was willing and had the authority from the voters in your 2014 referendum to take out bonds and do this yourself. But talk a little bit, Virgil, about the conversations the city had with DMEA about who was going to provide broadband to the home in Montrose itself.
Yeah, I think our push to exempt ourselves from Senate Bill 152 was less about our desire as a government entity to go into the internet service business. But the environment that we were in prior to that was such that we had companies that were saying, look, we can't do business in Montrose without this problem being solved. And so we heard that loud and clear. And so our move to be exempted from Senate Bill 152 was more about opening up all of the options. And if one of the options was, the only option was for us to do it, we felt that we needed to do that for our citizens. That was never our first intent, and I was very vocal about that's not what we want to do, but that's what we will do if no one else comes to the table to do this. We also looked at how are we perhaps putting up barriers for folks that want to do this. And I think we have a great relationship with DMEA Elevate that has reduced the barriers for them to enter to go ahead and serve our community. If anyone else would have asked, hey, we want to do this and we will commit to building out to your entire community, we would have given them the same incentives.
Do you agree, Kent? What kind of processes did Montrose simplify to make the build possible?
The city of Montrose, as much as we speak to the starving communities outside the area, and as much as there was competitive solutions here, the city of Montrose really kind of partnered with us very well to kind of make the opportunity come together. Providing service in a competitive environment couldn't have been possible, in the city of Montrose proper if we didn't have the support and if we didn't, come together as a team to try and solve a common good.
Yeah, we'll come back to this topic, but Dennis on the end has been so patient for half of our live stream here, and I want to get you into the conversation. You've got a great story, Dennis. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Proximity Space. What is it, and what made it possible?
So Proximity Space is a shared workspace. It's a co-working space located on Main Street here in Montrose, Colorado. It is also a software company that runs co-working spaces all over the country, in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, soon to be Europe as well. So we have clients all over the place, but it started here in Montrose as an idea and an opportunity to understand how broadband, if provided in the area, could affect the opportunities for employment in Montrose. how it could affect relocation into the area for Montrose. And so that was a collaboration between several entities. The city was definitely the major cheerleader in it, and we're super thankful for them. Elevate has come along beside after that. We're a benefactor of that service in the area. And so it was a space to kind of be a proving ground, if you will, or a ballpark to make it happen. And it brought somebody like me here. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've developed several businesses before, a relocation from Dallas, Texas to Telluride, Colorado. And after over a decade in Telluride, Colorado, I saw these opportunities presenting themselves in Montrose and made the relocation down to Montrose. So that's kind of the start of this.
Are you a skier, Dennis?
You know, what's funny is I skied more when I lived in Dallas than I did once I moved to Telluride, and I lived right at the base of the ski area. When you're a serial entrepreneur, when you're somebody that's trying to create new opportunities, you don't find as much time as you used to have for the recreation.
Right. So what would your business have been like if you didn't have the gigabit level symmetrical connectivity that you could get from either Montrose or DMEA?
Well, it wouldn't be possible. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do it. And part of that was the facilitation of the city just prior to Elevate, coming in and providing the service, actually sharing their connectivity with the space. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to do it. It was an interesting conversation at the time when we were opening. There was a question of whether or not this would be built for the future or whether or not it would be built for the present. And it was both, actually, and that was a pleasant surprise. As we opened up, we found that we had people in this community that were waiting for that opportunity to happen. And so we had an immediate need to have an extended connection, more so than what we could get presently as a business. And so it's really been fortunate that this growth has happened. More communities will begin to understand as we come into this choice economy, this gig economy, and gig not being gig, gig being like side gig.
Right.
So
gigs for the gig economy.
Exactly. So as that becomes more of a prevalent point of our life, it's more viewed as a utility. The connectivity to each other is more viewed as a utility, a way of life, an everyday need, just as much as, and you get double props for this, electricity is, right? You wouldn't pretend to try to relocate a business to an area and say, don't worry, we'll turn the lights on later, right? Just go ahead and bring the business.
Right.
So, but right now, that it's just as awkward to say, don't worry, we'll have connectivity by the time you get here.
One of the most or the second most asked about thing by relocation experts is what kind of broadband do you have?
As we move into to a new decade of technology, your car, your refrigerator, your home entertainment systems, your communication devices that you have, they don't operate as well or at all without that connectivity.
Well, we've got some guests here that I want to bring into the conversation shortly. But before I do that, let's ask every one of you, what's changed about Montrose over the last 3-4 years as this has been real? I mean, just talk a little bit about the community. I'm going to start with Councilman Anderson. Just how have you felt and observed the difference by having this kind of connectivity available to you?
Well, that's pretty easy. I can kind of leverage on what Dennis talked about. I've met people who have moved here and they rely on high-speed symmetrical broadband for their business who would not have been able to move here otherwise without that capability. And so without naming names, I can say that we have a gentleman who moved here from the East Coast who works for a company in Switzerland and does all his work with the fiber connection, and and I'm sure there's examples all over the country like that. Another person moved up from Texas, manages 500 people at the home office in Texas from his house here with great connection, does teleconferencing, does his meetings and everything that you would do in an office at home. So we're seeing more and more instances of that, and that's the kind of growth we want to promote. It's people who have good incomes, they don't produce pollution. You know, we don't have smokestacks in Montrose, and it's the kind of growth we want to see to keep our community vibrant and have opportunities for our children after they graduate from high school. So that's the kind of thing I've seen, and very proud of that we've gotten such a return from our community's investments in this technology.
Oh, got a microphone. Yeah, go ahead, Virgil.
You know, I think during this hour we've talked a lot about Montrose, and it's exciting what's happening in Montrose. But what really is exciting to me is our entire region is benefiting from this effort. It's and our region is tied together. Our economies are tied together, and when you talk to site selectors across the country, Montrose is not on their radar, but when you say Western Colorado, it is on their radar. And they picture a lifestyle in Western Colorado that is attainable, especially with internet service. A place that you can live and raise your families, make a decent living, participate in a digital economy in probably one of the most beautiful places in the country, if not the world. And so I think the thing that has really excited me about this effort is the changes to our rural, smaller communities that are being transformed for the better. Their children are able to go away to college and come back and live and make a living in their small communities that breathes the lifeblood back into those communities. That's what's most exciting to me.
Yeah, Ken.
And, you know, I guess to kind of piggyback onto that, you know, as broadband is truly coming into focus as a must-have and you know, a necessity, a utility, if you will, you know, we as an electric co-op have spent the last 80 years perfecting our business. You know, nobody would want to come home and say, you know, they can only get half of the power they need to run their house. And likewise, nobody wants to come home and have to guess at when they can get on the internet to be able to do the things that they enjoy or want to do. And blending that with, you know, such an amazing place as Montrose and the surrounding areas only allows people to kind of move from the Front Range this way or from other states or cities to this kind of place and continue to be economically viable. So,
Dennis, what's the environment like at Proximity Space just down the street here?
Well, it's growing. It's growing fast. I mean, the SBA says study that 50% of the 50% of the workforce will be remote by next year. So we have a large interest in lifestyle. People that want to live in a certain place that inspires them. Obviously, Roy, thank you, and be able to bring those jobs with them. And so I think what we're seeing is the result of that, and benefiting from the result of that is that as long as they can facilitate their life, it's no longer, if I want a $100,000 job to be at the top of my market, I have to go to a tier 1 city to be able to do that and facilitate it. Now, because of connectivity, I can choose the place that I want to live. It's a choice economy. It's a gig economy. It's an opportunist economy to be able to say, I want to take this job, my employer will let me take it with me, and I can go where I want to go and live where I want to live.
Moving your job with you, yeah. Well, can we invite you up, Chelsea Rosti, to speak a little bit about some of the things? You can stay there, Mayor. Go ahead and have a seat here, and let me thank you again for joining us for this part of the conversation, Chelsea. So tell us a little bit about what you do for the city and some of the things you're finding as you talk to potential businesses.
Absolutely. So I'm Chelsea Rosti, the Director of Business Innovation for the City of Montrose. My job really entails being a connector between business and local government. So the idea is that I kind of lead the way for a business or a developer to come and work with local government, and I act as a tour guide through not only the process but the community itself. So it's really interesting, the things that I've got to see and learn and do in my position, and you know, it's just never a dull moment in the things that I get to learn. But a lot of times with business, that is the first question, is connectivity, about what it's going to be like to do business here, what can they expect, and broadband is a huge piece of that. In fact, we have a really, really cool, I think, business incentives brochure that the first thing at the top, says super fast internet. That's something that you can expect here, and I think a lot of people are sometimes surprised to learn about that here, along with some of the other great things that we have happening in Montrose.
We haven't really talked about the price of that service. Don't go anywhere, Chelsea. I want to ask you more questions. What are the price ranges for the broadband that is offered through DMEA?
Yeah, for business, the 100 meg symmetrical we sell for $79.95, all the way up to a 1 gigabit symmetrical we sell for $319.95. For residential, that same 100 meg symmetrical is $59.95, and $49.95, and for the 1 gig is $79.95.
Okay, so $80 for residential gigabit broadband. That's
symmetrical.
Symmetrical. That's important as we now begin to increasingly upload as well as download, right? So we've heard a little bit about Dennis's business and proximity space. Tell us about some of the other businesses that are operating in Montrose that really, from your experience, wouldn't be able to do it without this kind of connectivity, Chelsea.
Absolutely. So first I just want to say proximity really led the way for us in this, and it's been a great relationship. I personally worked within the space for a year, just kind of being immersed in all of that, and it's been really great for our community. It's revitalized an entire downtown block that was kind of empty and a little bit forlorn on that side of Main Street, and now it's vibrant and every storefront is filled, I believe we can say at this point, on that block on both sides. So that's been really great. We actually just had a business move to Montrose, and a big piece of that was the internet. It's a company who is just a retail sales vendor, but all of his sales are online. And so they're able to warehouse here in Montrose, live that epic, awesome lifestyle, run this actually highly successful retail business, which is actually a fly fishing shop online. And so that's, we were able to attract that business, bring them here, and now we're hoping they'll be able to teach that kind of skill set to some of our other businesses to digitize their businesses as well. We have a lot of, there's probably not a business in town that this hasn't touched. For instance, Mayfly Outdoors, I don't know if you guys have discussed a little bit about that, but
not today here, so
but
tell us a little bit about
Mayfly, of course, is a business that manufactures both Ross and Able fly fishing reels. We were in danger of losing them out of our community because of a lot of reasons, but some of which being some amenities that we might not be able to provide. Fast forward now, they've built a brand new facility. They have automated manufacturing right here in Montrose along the on Compagre River, and I know that broadband is a huge piece of that. We have, like I said, a lot of businesses, but those are probably the two that just, from a recent one moving here and then just a bigger impact one, aside from proximity, that we could talk about.
Software developer as well?
Yeah, actually, but I'd like to toss that to Virgil because he has a really great experience with that.
Go ahead, Virgil.
Sure, and Dennis can chime in on this one too. One business that I think is a great success story, a couple high school grads from Montrose went away to college, became developers, and brought their business back to Montrose. Had a new idea to start a smartphone monitoring for federal parolees instead of an ankle bracelet. And they actually have came to us and said, look, we want to do this. Part of our business model is to monitor these folks over our smartphones. And so we need to set up a center where our agents can actually interact with these folks from their smartphone to our center and challenge them to make sure that they're where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we need very fast internet to do that. And in our current location, that's going to be a challenge. And so this was around the same time as proximity space. Before Elevate was available, no one else was able to fill the need. And so the city of Montrose came in through an economic development incentive, provided them that service in return for adding jobs to our economy. And so that was one example. They're thriving now and doing really well in Montrose. Dennis works with a lot of developers, software developers that maybe work for other companies throughout the country or around the world, and doing it all right here from Montrose.
Ken, would you add any other examples that you're aware of? I mean, what are you're hearing as you go about helping get, obviously, residents? You've reached 72% of Montrose thus far, and you have to reach that last bit within the next year or so. What are you finding as you help businesses as well as residences light up that they're saying about service?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to that reliability factor, everybody that we talk to, all the potential businesses, we've talked to some Bitcoin mining operations, some data centers, people that just want to set up shop here on the Western Slope and enjoy this lifestyle. Dependability is the #1 goal. It's as much as all the incumbents, and I've seen a couple of questions pop up that are relevant to why would we get into this business, and the whole reason why we're here is to provide that dependability at a cost-effective price point. So had any of the incumbents, the competitors that we face, stepped up with a quality product, we would never have been pushed as our members did, 3 years ago to leverage our assets. If the quality was there, we simply wouldn't be getting into this market.
Yeah, I suppose it goes without saying to our audiences watching, I hope the quality is good. We would not be able to do this webcast from Montrose were it not for the network that you have and this symmetrical gigabit quality network to send it out. Virgil and the others, there's probably a lot of people who are rural communities who may watch this who want to know, what are some of the steps that I need to do to get there? And so I want to kind of go back to this a little bit. You talked about some of the things that the city did, but also about sort of the interactions with others. Talk a little bit about some of the issues about rights of way that sometimes come up, or the issues, as building on what we already spoke about, transport costs, how the city and the broader community plays a role in those.
I think I'd like to say, one principle that worked for our region, Montrose in particular, is whenever we got a no, we didn't accept that. No was not an acceptable answer. And I think at every stage of this, we got a lot of no's. When we said, we need better service in Montrose, we heard, no, you don't. You have enough service in Montrose. And whenever we would hear that, we'd say, okay, thank you. That's not acceptable. We're moving on. And so I think when I talk to other communities, and I get a lot of questions from other communities, I think the key principle is never accept no. You know what your community needs, and keep going forward until you find the right answer. For instance, rights of way, as you mentioned, the use of easements, especially with our local electric cooperative, working on our middle mile network, easements became a real issue for us. We had fiber in the air. We'd already purchased, our local cooperative, when I say we, had purchased easements for the use of those rights of way crossing private property. They've been compensated. The fiber was in the air, and we felt that in some cases we had to go back and perfect that to say we want to use it for commercial broadband service instead of just for the SCADA or the supervisory use for running the utility. Actually, DMEA did a great job of going out and perfecting those. Recently, last year, we had a bill that went through our General Assembly that said, look, we recognize in state law that you don't need to do that. If you've got a easement already perfected, there's already fiber in that, you need to, a property owner that feels harmed needs to show how they were harmed. Usually they're benefited because they have better internet service. And so that's a law that just went into effect, or it's going into effect soon, I believe in August. And so we think that those measures that have taken a lot of folks that have told us no, that you can't do that. We've moved those even into state law, where we've been able to move this process forward to get to yes.
And if I may.
Please, chime in.
To give that answer, no, it's often the most easiest answer that somebody can give. It takes the least amount of thought, it takes the least amount of effort, and to give that no just kind of stifles progress. It stops the issue dead in its tracks. And you know, we at DMEA and the city, you know, largely Virgil himself have pushed forward with a forced answer, yes. You know, figure out how we can solve this problem, and we're happy to be, you know, in partnership with the city to try and get this problem solved.
Dennis?
Yeah, I would just remind people that your local municipal group is not your adversary. You know, it's upon the citizens of an area or community of an area to really engage and ask for those things that you need. You know, one of the major facilitations for local government is infrastructure, and so is, like I mentioned before, if this is a needed utility and everybody needs it, then it's as incumbent on you to come ask for it and to participate for it. One of my favorite relationships with the city is the answer is not always yes. It sometimes can be no, but when the answer is no, it's usually no, we can't do that, but maybe we could do this, and how would that help the situation? And so I would, you know, as somebody that works with other communities as well, I would encourage the communities, the cities, to envision what gets to a yes, and encourage the community to say, okay, if we can't do this, but what can you do to help?
Sure.
And I think that's where you see progress happen.
Agreed.
One more area. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Councilman.
I was just going to say, I think political will is important, and communities, you know, our city council supported a lot of the questions that came up. We passed ordinances when necessary and directed our city staff to work on these problems and solve them. And it's because our constituents in the community wanted better broadband and told us and elected us to make it happen. And I think that's for communities that haven't started yet, that's the first thing, is to get political support, get people on your council who are supporting it and recognize that you want it, and then it kind of flows from there.
At least one area that I want to come to before we get to final thoughts and takeaways that each of you have is the issue of competition, right? And so cities often like to put forth an open access network, and that allows multiple competitors to operate. Virgil, I take it you were or were not considering that, and could you just talk about the agreement that you put in place and how it would affect others that would want to compete in this marketplace?
Sure, I think in the terms of open access, we actually we received funding from another initiative with the state government, the Department of Local Affairs in Colorado, put forward a challenge to our rural Colorado to move their broadband initiatives forward. And by the way, we're going to put together a pool of money, $20 million, to make that happen. And so part of the constraints of that money, the network, the infrastructure that you put in must be open access. And so we have seen we did a middle mile network in cooperation with DMEA. Some of this network actually operates on those fiber lines that they had installed for their between substations in return for helping them perfect rights of way. That network is part of this middle mile infrastructure that we built as a region, Region 10. That network must remain open access, have ability for ISPs and WISPs to take advantage of that where they can, and to buy service over that. So that is an approach that was deemed by the state as a good way to move this forward, and the best way to use to get the maximum benefit out of those state funds. We didn't get to the point of saying our local, if we became a municipal internet service provider, what that network may be. Open access is a great goal to aspire to, but again, the same reason we want more competition, someone selling that wants less competition. So there's an internal strife. So if you're in the business to build out your network and you want to have as many folks using that as possible, one way is to provide great service. The other way is to not make your assets available to others. So there's a balance there that has to be struck, and with public dollars, I think open access is probably the right balance. And private competition, when you're putting that investment into the network, you're probably leaning the other way.
Do you want to comment on that, Kent?
Yeah, I mean, we as a cooperative, if you will, a public entity, and we kind of see it for both sides of the coin. We want our communities to have better broadband. That is our ultimate goal. That was the main driver from the beginning. We stepped up. We created an entity to do just that. Equally, if the problem can be solved, through our competition, providing better service, ultimately our goal is done. We have achieved either way. So
how is Elevate financed? Is it a completely separate entity, or is it?
We're a wholly owned subsidiary of the electric cooperative itself.
And the investment for that was taken out by DMEA?
Yes. Yeah. It's wholly funded, wholly.
And we alluded earlier to this agreement you have with the city that you need to cover the city 100% by 4 years. So tell us how far you are on that.
We're 72% of the way through that effort.
Okay.
So 72% of the electric meters within the city limits have seen service provided thus far. We've got another 28% to go. The hardest 28% I'll say, but we still have a goal in front of us, and a little less than 2 years to get it done. So.
Okay. Well, at the start of this webcast, I told our watchers that this is the first rural broadband webcast of the Rural Telecommunications Congress. We hope to be able to do more of these in other communities around the country. And what we're trying to do is to highlight where it works, right? Because we hear a lot about how bad broadband is, and it is bad in lots of parts of rural America, but there are places that have got it right. And so we want to be able to share those stories with you, and to go to other places and share those with the nation as well. So I want to ask each one on the panel to talk a little bit about what lessons do you think other rural communities, just imagine another community around 20,000, just like the size of Montrose, but in Alabama or in Florida or Hawaii, what would you recommend to them they need to consider as they go about their rural broadband strategy? And let's just go down the line here. Start with you, Chelsea.
Well, I feel very fortunate to get to go first, because I would imagine some of my partners might say the same thing. But what we found in this community, whether it's broadband or anything else, is that collaboration is key. And so whether or not there was a poor relationship with another entity in the past, it's coming forward to the table and saying this is for the greater good of everyone who lives here and who may live here in the future. And so that collaboration, I would say, just putting down any, issues that there may have been and coming together over something that's very important, that is key. Secondarily, just from a business standpoint, which is why I might be on the panel, is this is important for business. It's like Dennis has said, it's vital. And so keeping that in mind, that business drives, your tax base, and you have to feed that. You can't expect it to just come all the time. You have to feed that in your economy, and you have to make sure that businesses have the things that they need to operate in this day and age in every community, rural or not.
So I alluded before to political will, and I think if you're in a small community and people kind of wonder, why do I care about this? You might form a citizen group, and it's easy to search on the web and find lots of reasons why this is so valuable to a community. Besides economic development, think about healthcare and the ability to deliver healthcare to people's homes, to have robotic surgery at your hospital. So I think there's lots of ways to convince your community, let's step forward and get this done. And maybe it'll be easy for you, but if it's not, just find all these valuable reasons. And like someone said, it's like electricity was 100 years ago. I mean, our society is getting to the point where you really can't live well without this capability.
Great points to each of you. I think those are right on. And I, especially the idea of political will. I think staff at your communities, within your local co-ops, can push the effort so far, but without that, you know, the cheerleader from your local elected officials that have the that ability to kind of bring those issues forward. I think the thing that I would like to pass along to fellow communities and rural Colorado or rural America is that don't sit back and think this is going to happen on its own. It really will not. It won't happen without champions. And those champions don't look within one organization. As Chelsea mentioned, collaboration is the key, and it takes a lot of people to move these efforts forward. This is not easy work. It's never easy, and if the work isn't undertaken, you're never going to get there. So get started. If you haven't started, get started and work together, and you know, get your political leaders behind your efforts, and you'll make progress.
And yeah, the age-old saying is it takes a village to raise a child, and you know the whole message there is a community coming together to raise a child, and broadband and utility service of any kind, whether it's broadband, electric, water, whatnot. I mean, it requires a dependable product. It requires something that everybody can afford, and to solve that problem, it takes the community coming together to really get behind it and make it a successful solution.
Well, and I think when the electric co-op says, we have a lot of expertise in this field, we know how to, manage the rights of way, how to work and bring things. You've been doing this for many, many decades with one utility, and now you're just adding another utility to the mix.
Yeah, it's, we have the pole infrastructure, we have the experience in the easements and rights of way, and we have the experience in building a dependable product, something that people come to depend on to be up, day or night, storm or no storm. And, it's just furthering that same storyline, whether it's 80 years back to the REA, the Rural Electrification Act, or, today in solving broadband.
Dennis, and then I'll wrap it up after you, unless there's other thoughts people want to share, but go ahead, Dennis.
I would say, final thought of how this facilitated or how it happened is there has to be some steadfastness to the idea of what you're wanting to do. All too often, innovation gets stifled in rural communities because of a bend to a vocal minority. It doesn't happen in bigger cities because they're drowned out. It just doesn't happen. It's all too easy in a community, rural communities that are smaller. You have a bigger voice, and people are more open to listening. But when you have an initiative, when you have a purpose that is for the greater good, I think that was a great way of saying it, a rising tide opportunity, it's your purpose as a political leader to not, have the will to not bend to the vocal minority, and it's our purpose as a community to give you the support so that you can facilitate and do that. So that's what I would leave with, is just all too often innovation gets stifled by the vocal minority. Push forward, continue to work together, and those things happen.
Well, excellent. Before we wrap up, I just want to make two final observations based on some of the things we've heard. The first is that Montrose, and we didn't hear perhaps as much of this as could be talked about, has really capitalized on some distinct advantages, right? Like the natural beauty of the surrounding, the desire that people have to come and play in the outdoors here. And last evening I went up to Black Canyon, beautiful natural resource I had never had the opportunity to see. But it's that kind of resource that draws people to Montrose. They just need to have a reason to stay with being able to do work. And so I think that the community has really focused on that and its business outreach and focusing its outreach. And so, find what you're good at as a community, what your strengths are, and figure out how broadband can fit into that and run with that. And I think the second point, we've definitely heard this here, is there really is a need to collaborate between the city, the Council of Governments, Region 10 in this case, electric co-ops, private companies. We haven't heard as much on this panel, although I'm sure we will in future ones, is about there are other telecommunications providers, whether they're business telecommunications providers or wireless internet service providers, who depend upon those low transport costs. And those low transport costs are a product of the work that the community has done in helping to figure out how there can be more resources, and when there aren't adequate competition, doing it or threatening to do it themselves. And those are very important points that I think are takeaways, not just from this session here in Montrose, but for other rural communities. So I thank you again for watching, and please follow us. Rural Telecommunications Congress is at Rural Telecon with a C, with an N for Congress.org. And I am Drew Clark, the editor and publisher of BroadbandBreakfast.com, and we're a internet community building a focus on better broadband and better lives. So please join me remotely for thanking this great panel for participating, and we will come again some other time to discuss rural broadband and fueling the fire of rural innovation. So thank you very much.